Okay, so I'm going to go
Great.
ahead.
Great.
Welcome, LA Progressive friends and family. I'm Sharon Kyle here with you again today. And I'm joined by Stephen Starr. And Stephen and I don't think we've met until last week. I don't think we've known each other. But I was really delighted to meet you. We were engaged in, or he invited me to be engaged in an event, and he's going to tell you all about it. But let me just introduce Stephen a little bit. He is an organizer at XR, which stands for Extinction Rebellion. He started out as a contract promoter for Bob Marley and the Wailers, headed for the New York Film Office for the William Morris Agency, then went on to produce award-winning independent films and television for both MTV and CBS. And he doesn't like to, clearly he doesn't have a big head, and we were just talking about how he likes to remain behind the scenes, but this man has accomplished quite a bit in his life. He left mainstream media to co-found the Los Angeles Independent Media Station, ran KPFK. He helped establish the Right to Water, produced an award-winning Sundance documentary, Flow, for love of water, has been engaged with the Occupy movement and a bunch of other stuff. Stephen, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Sharon. Really appreciate being on the channel with you, and I'm a big fan of the work you all been doing for all these years, and appreciate the opportunity to talk. I never do this, so I'm happy to be your willing victim. Let's talk about whatever you like.
Right. So, what we're going to do is I'm going to share my screen. You've sent me a slide deck, and this slide deck was used in the event last week. And I thought that the slide deck itself was just so powerful that I wanted to capture this in a conversation with you, because you really know a lot about nonviolent direct action. And I believe and wholeheartedly support that, and really think that that's the only way to go. If we want change, it has to be done nonviolently. So right now I'm looking for the share screen, the share screen mode. Here we go.
And I can
And
tell a little bit about what people are going to see.
sounds good. Okay.
Great. So just so everyone knows, like we had a remarkably wonderful turnout across this country over the weekend. Some say 11 million, some say more. That is a very large number of folks who came out onto the streets, in classrooms, on all the resolve that we saw this weekend. It means that we're stepping forward. It means that we're finding our voice. It means that we're ready to get busy doing this work. And what I've noticed, and I think a whole lot of us who have been around for a while have noticed, that a lot of us don't know the real history of how change actually happens. There are beautiful examples of that across the last 100+ years. And so we're going to talk about that a bit today so that folks who are eager to jump in, to get out on the streets, to do nonviolent direct action, civil disobedience, to understand the history of it is really the most important thing I can offer right now. And I hope that this inspires some folks and we can talk it through.
All righty. Okay. So I've got the screen up.
Let's talk about what nonviolent direct action results in so folks can get a sense of it. So we've all heard about sit-ins and marches. A bunch of us progressives have participated. The outcomes are peace talks about ending wars and the strikes and the hunger strikes. You'll note that's how apartheid was ended, and blocking traffic and blockades, things like that, start mass mobilizations. We'll dig in to all of these things in a bit. People putting their bodies on the line results in global solidarity. People who do economic boycotts save millions of lives. Shaming politicians, massive public awareness. Family prayer vigils, removal of politicians. Street theater, festivals, fully activated populace. These are all evidence of a couple of hundred different kinds of nonviolent direct actions. And, occupations, we'll be talking about that a little bit. Inspiration, hope, and solidarity. These are the results, beautiful results of the various forms of nonviolent direct action that have taken place since history, over history. And if we go to the next slide, Sharon, we're going to talk about where it all started.
I'm so
It's
glad you're doing this because people often think that these marches in the streets that they're nothing but performance and don't result in real change. So thank you for bringing this up, the women's suffrage parades.
what I love saying about this particular moment is it starts with women. It always has, and people don't seem to know that history as well as they might. But, this is a perfect example. The women's suffrage, they were called the women's suffrage parades. And this is early 1900s. This is before Gandhi, before any of the stuff we'll be talking about. This was happening in the United States. It was happening in the UK. And these women marched through jeers. They marched through fists. They were wearing petticoats and boots. They were jailed, they were beaten, they were force fed, and they kept marching. And the vote wasn't granted, it was seized by women with dignity and fire.
Wow, that's amazing. In
Mm.
the early 1900s. And I bet you they were poo pooed.
Ridiculed. Men had so much nastiness to say. You want to talk about toxic masculinity. Well, imagine 1900 women
Mhm.
demanding their right to vote. Imagine what that might prompt in uneducated, let's just say less than conscious men.
Wow. My grandmother died in 2009, but she was born in 1909. And she was
Hmm,
born, she didn't have the right to vote.
there you go. So we move on from there to the 30s in India, into South Asia, and this is Gandhi, right? And he didn't start his marches. They call them the salt marches, but he walked to fracture an empire. His goal, step by step, barefoot and unarmed, joined by hundreds, then thousands, then millions. He literally cracked the spine of British rule. And nonviolence here, the best way to frame it, discipline turned into power.
Wow. Right. And we know about the outcome of that. Just look at what's happening, what happened eventually with
Hmm.
the empire, the English empire in India dissolved.
Colonialism, the clock started to tick, didn't it? And then we're met with the early days, the very early days of the anti-apartheid movement. And this was just black South Africans lining up for jail like it was a sacrament. The regime, the Afrikaners, the apartheid regime demanded obedience, and what they got instead was a movement. And apartheid days were numbered, and it took a while. It took 27 plus years, but 30, let me see, 50, 35 or so years. But guess what? That was the end of the apartheid movement in South Africa.
And you say it took a lot of years, but I think that that's pretty common. That
Mm.
length of time. If you look at the Women's March in the early 1900s, and when did they get the vote? 1920. It was like 20 years later, 25 years later.
Mhm.
So that's probably right on track for the way it
Right,
is
right
with
on
other.
time. Yeah, I mean, it really long haul, right? Remember, we need to remember that it starts somewhere, but the pulse and the fuse gets
Right.
lit, and over time, and yeah, sometimes it takes 10, 20, 30, 40 years,
Yeah.
but over time it happens. And that's why these marches and these acts of civil disobedience are so important, because if you don't get out there, you never get what you're looking for. So here we are, and the next one up, I guess, is the Montgomery bus boycott. We're going to
Ah,
spend a little time on the civil rights movement. We all know who that woman is. That's
ah.
Rosa Parks sitting on a bus. And just, they they walked in rain, in the heat. They didn't stop walking. One woman, one tired woman, Rosa Parks, she said no. And the whole city rose up behind her. And it wasn't about buses. It was about dignity and
That's right.
injustice linked.
That's right. And in fact, several other people, mostly Black women, had done the same thing that Rosa Parks did. But Rosa Parks was actually an organizer. She wasn't just a seamstress, and her feet weren't tired.
Hmm.
They had strategized to do this on this day, at this time, because they had to build an infrastructure that was prepared to take on the city of Montgomery, Alabama. So once they had that infrastructure set up, they were ready to go ahead and do this direct action.
I love hearing that history. Love hearing that, Sharon. So next up, we're going to go to the Birmingham campaign. You know, this was clergy kneeling in the streets, getting soaked by fire hoses, children, fire, but all of them understood the value of nonviolence. And in civil disobedience, they placed their bodies in harm's way. They met violence with prayer. And Birmingham, blown up across the evening news, wasn't just a campaign, it became a mirror to all of us, to the entire country of what was going on. And people stepped up.
It's unbelievable. During this same period, a little bit earlier, the desegregation of the schools, Brown v. Board of Education, 1954, and the desegregation of schools, primarily in the South. I heard a talk given by one of the Little Rock Nine in Little Rock, Arkansas. There were 9 young Black, I think it was Central High School in Little Rock, and they had to be escorted by the National Guard into the schools. But sadly, the story that's not told is what their lives were like once they were inside the school, because they did not have guards escorting them from class to class. They were in those schools now by themselves, 9 little Black kids with white adults and white kids hated,
Hmm.
and they were attacked inside of schools. They were eventually the school closed. White people stopped sending their kids to those schools. They just would not. They refused
Hmm.
to be segregated, to be integrated.
Those kids, those stories. It's heartbreaking, but it is courage, you know, it's courage and it's fearlessness and it's willingness. I can only imagine what it meant to those kids to choose to go back into that school every day and to get their education and to stand up for their rights. These are little kids changing the world, right?
That's right. That's right. And they didn't tell their parents what they were experiencing
Mm,
because they knew that their parents would pull them out,
mm,
and they really wanted to be agents of change.
mm. And that all led to something that became legend, the March on Washington, 250,000 people on the Mall in Washington, standing at the foot of American power between the monument and the White House. They said, "We are not asking, we are telling you for what we want." And with
Yeah,
song, Sacred Defiance, MLK, and thousands of others spoke a dream that it still resonates, it still gets our heart pounding, it still makes us realize the power of nonviolent direct action.
that's right. And my grandmother was standing in that audience.
Mm, mm. So we'll keep moving and we'll take it to Selma. And this is when it got real, crossing that bridge. They didn't know what was on the other side of that bridge, but they knew it would be clubs and it would be gas and it would be hate. And they kept on marching and they walked anyway, and Bloody Sunday burned into history. And the whole nation, anyone who had any moral conscience whatsoever, became, let's just say, educated as to how deep the racist pulse was in this country. And the right to vote finally carried into law. So this is right in our backyard here in Los Angeles, right? This is the incredible, amazing farm worker strikes, the grape boycott, Dolores Huerta, Cesar Chavez, men and women standing up. They're feeding us and they're starving, right? Can you
Mm,
imagine that? Feeding
no, no, I can't
us.
imagine it.
They walked out. They marched. They fainted from fasting. They turned the fields, the fields they were picking, into battlegrounds for justice. And they forced the entire country to listen, because when you start messing with food security, everybody realizes what's not on the shelves.
Yeah. You know, when in looking at this, this was the first time for me as a kid that I participated. I stopped eating grapes, and
Hmm.
I stopped eating grapes and went way beyond the boycott. I stopped eating grapes probably for 20, 25 years. after that. But it, but for this boycott, I would not have known, what their lives were like.
The fact that you stopped and kept stopping and the impulse for solidarity, and look where you're sitting now.
Yeah.
Kind of beautiful to see it's so it's powerful. It's powerful to see the constancy was how I'd put it, the constancy.
Yeah, yeah, I did. I wonder if this was sort of my awakening. The civil rights movement, believe it or not, with me being Black, you would think that I would have known more about the civil rights movement, especially with my grandmother being right there at the March on Washington. She was there, and I kind of remember her going, but
Hmm.
I didn't know anything about what she did while she was there. I was a little kid, so they didn't really think to include me in the conversations. But by this time, I'm a couple of years older, few
Hmm.
years older, and I'm finding stuff out on my own.
Hmm. There was a pulse in the country. We are the same age, Sharon, and
Yeah,
there was a pulse in the country. And if you felt it, it got your curiosity going and you wanted to know. And the music and the little bits of information that were passed around, we weren't hearing it on the evening news. We were telling each other the story, and it slowly but surely broke through. I really understand that feeling. I remember, I sometimes my friends and I, we talk about like how the music was like our Facebook. It was like our social network. We were listening
yes,
to the Motown stuff, and the singers were singing about social justice. We're like, what's that? But when you're dancing to it, it's pretty powerful, isn't it?
yeah, yeah,
Pretty
yeah.
powerful.
Sam Cooke, a change is gonna come.
Change is gonna come.
I still, whenever I hear that song, and I hear it frequently because I have it in my playlist, it
Mm,
still moves me, and I
yeah,
still believe a change is gonna come.
it's coming. It's already there. We just have to get there, right? Don't we? Yeah.
Yeah,
All right. So next, we're going to move on to Stonewall, and
yeah,
Stonewall changed the world. After basically it was supposed to be yet another shame-filled raid on a bar on Christopher Street in downtown West Village, Manhattan. But something broke, and the queer folks said, and they threw bricks and they danced in the street and they stopped hiding. And out of that rupture came a roar, and that roar has carried rights for LGBTQ plus all the way through the Supreme Court and into the common life we all lead together now. And
yeah.
the fight's still going, but the rights are enshrined now, and may they always be. Okay, so we're going to keep moving. We're going to go on to, yes, the women's movement. This is, as I said at the top of this, it all started.
So I have anti-Vietnam on my
Oh,
screen.
go to the next slide. We'll probably get to women. Let's see what we got next, and maybe we'll come back to.
Okay, yeah, we
There we
have
go.
women's.
Yeah, yeah. So I remember I was a little kid and suddenly women are rising up everywhere. And I'm trying to figure out what a girl is, right? I'm like, 11, 12 years old. And I'm being told, you better be more careful than the men before you. And that was a lesson for me.
Yeah,
And, basically they weren't asking nicely anymore, these women in the 60s. They were like, They stormed legislatures, they raised consciousness, they demanded personhood, from equal pay to reproductive rights. They redrew the boundaries of power for everyone. And, we're all better off for it, aren't we? We are all
yes, yeah,
better off.
yeah, we are.
Let's jump back to the Vietnam piece. I'm sorry it's out of order there, but that line in the sand there, that like body and mass of humanity on the streets facing down the forces of
Amazing.
the state saying, this has got to stop. That's where my political consciousness really came to bear. I was a kid watching the Vietnam War and hearing and seeing the devastation and they watching people fill the streets and burn their draft cards and surround the Pentagon and students and veterans and artists just challenging the government, and they turned grief and sorrow and madness into fury, and then they turned their fury into peace.
Sure did. It's very important that young people today understand that anytime we've had any major social or political change in this country, it started out with grassroots activism, and it's been successful when it's nonviolent direct action that starts it.
Always nonviolence. And just to touch on that for a moment, there, inside of the current movement, there's a conversation around using the word nonviolence. And, I'm old school, so I'm saying if we don't use that word, we're denying our history. People want to use the word peaceful. Yes to peaceful protest, but understand the science behind it is nonviolence direct action and civil disobedience. And so we go out on the streets and we say peaceful protest, and we understand all the tools that come with it. And that is where we're talking about today, the various tools that drove ending the war in Vietnam. So anyway, I'm going to go on and on, but let's keep moving. So we
Yeah, this is good because with when we talk about nonviolent direct action, that can be the spark that begins the social or political change. And then we go full circle. And in some respects, we haven't completely gone full circle on this whole issue of war. Yes, we've ended the Vietnam War, but different wars. The United States has continued to be the most war war-like country that seems to love war. Um, but I was thinking about we get to the end, and I was thinking about a documentary that Ken Burns released that talks about he shares some things that went on in Vietnam, specifically related to President Nixon having an opportunity. He tried to prolong it because it would be politically beneficial to him.
There it is. And the devastations, I mean, not to bombing Cambodia, the fraud of the Gulf of Tonkin. There's so much in Vietnam to study and learn from. But yes, you're exactly right, Sharon. Since then, we're talking about, Afghanistan, we're talking about Iraq, we're talking about trillions of dollars spent on the war machine that could be spent on, education and healthcare and all these things. But there's big money to be made, and it's always driven by big money, and we're living it even today. And, we have to keep fighting, don't we?
We do. And we also have to keep fighting for people to educate themselves, become politically engaged. Because had we known what Ken Burns shared with us, Vietnam would have probably ended many years before it
Yeah.
actually did.
Yeah. Well, that's a longer conversation, but yes to that. And let's keep going because I want to make sure that folks realize that they're going to be represented in different ways. And the next one up is disability.
Okay.
Disability rights did not exist before a bunch of kids got busy saying, give us access. We can't live this way. It is not fair that we can't take the stairs. So for 28 days, a group of disabled activists occupied the federal building in DC without ramps or restrooms, and all they had was their resolve and their demand, and they won. And as we all know, accessibility is all over our country now in so many ways. Not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but just night and day compared to what it was before those kids sat in and demanded with nonviolent direct action their rights.
Absolutely. And I just want to say something about this. I had a dear one in my family who found himself needing the use of a wheelchair, and we'd never had a wheelchair in our family. And I was going to take him someplace in Manhattan, and this was back in the late 80s. And we really was sort of stopped in our tracks. We could only go one block. There were no sidewalk ramps. And it really opened up my eyes to see how important diversity, equity, and inclusion is. Because if someone was sitting at the table with a disability or wheelchair person that uses a wheelchair was involved in the planning,
Mm.
they would know to bring this kind of stuff to the table. But because they're excluded in every other way of life, including the planning of how the streets are designed, or then they're counted out. And then that makes their lives impossible.
Impossible. and we don't understand it until we like sprain an ankle and start
Right.
walking around on crutches going, wait a second,
Yeah,
this world is not made for me.
that's right.
Imagine living your whole life that way.
Mm-hmm.
You get a taste of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we move on, and of course, we have to talk about no nukes and nuclear power and the threat of nuclear catastrophe. And this is a bunch of folks, just like the Berrigan brothers and the Jesuit priests who poured blood on the tips of warheads. Clamshell Alliance in 1977 kicked off the no nukes movement. They occupied a nuclear facility. It became a movement that ultimately forced the question of whether we were going to see ourselves as capable of ever acting again with a nuclear weapon. We are the only country on the planet that ever did. And now we're in a, mutually assured destruction agreement that's soon going to expire. But in 1977, a bunch of young people got out on the streets and started to say no. And they put their bodies on the line to stop the nuclear industry. And Seabrook, which is the picture we're looking at, it showed the planet how to fight for itself. And a whole lot of people jumped in.
We're still fighting that one and still
Still,
will.
still will. So this is now we're going to move over to Europe for a moment. Solidarity, Gdansk. This was a bunch of workers saying, we're in a shipyard and we've had enough. And that shipyard rise up turned into a revolution, workers defying a regime with strikes and prayer, non-violently. The government cracked down and they stood taller. Lech Walesa, who's in that picture, and Poland, it was changed forever because of that movement. Again, non-violent, civil disobedience, direct action. Chile, I mean, just think about an entire community turning pots and pans into thunder. Think about how all these women and men grabbed their pots and pans out of the kitchen, started banging them. That banging, that thunder is still going on today. They filled the streets. They kept doing it year after year against injustice of every kind. And, this is a legendary movement that changed the world forever down there. And Chile, is a case study in how to take simple kitchen utensils and go into direct action and nonviolence and win. Okay, the Philippines, right? By the
Wow.
millions, unarmed, singing, praying. They toppled a dictator, no bloodshed, just unity, faith, and courage. The church in had so much to do with this, proof that people can move mountains together, and that country will never be the same. Now, we're all still in this fight, and as you said earlier, Sharon, it all takes years, but you got to start somewhere. Sometimes it takes decades, but you got to start somewhere. Act up. So this is I'm in the 80s, I'm living in New York, and I'm watching friends of mine die. And I'm watching the silence and the shame all around me, and nobody's talking about it. And Reagan refuses to even mention the word. And, this is going on for not a month, not 2 months, but year in, year out. People are dying. Larry Kramer started an organization called ACT UP. He wrote a play about it. This movement of people lying in the streets saying, we refuse to die. We refuse to allow you to continue hiding the truth of what's happening. It changed the world. ACT UP was, as badass a nonviolent direct action movement as we've seen in this country ever. And it really changed the weather on how we were forced as a country to face something that was so tragic that millions, millions died.
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep moving. So in Czechoslovakia in 1989, the Velvet Revolution, this is another example of simple no bullets, no blood, just jingling keys, crowded squares. 10 days later, the entire dictatorship collapsed. See, this is what happens when people get out on the streets. You can collapse a dictatorship if enough people get out on the streets. what we saw this past weekend, 11 million people out on the streets, I can tell you that message landed. No matter what the administration said since then, they are looking at themselves going, well, we can't quite, wow, people are not happy. And they're trying to figure out how to work around that. And that dent in their consciousness, we got to keep getting out there because what they're trying to do and what we're willing to fight for is the future of democracy. And all I can say is that things like the Velvet Revolution tell the story well, and that history really matters. And the next slide is something all of us were astonished by. One man standing in front of tanks in China. One man. I think the whole world went, wow, look what
Yes.
one man can do.
And I want to encourage people who are watching this to look up each of these are revolutions. These are revolutionary movements. Look them up, find out what happened afterwards. If you ever wonder or question power of nonviolent direct action.
And of course, after Tiananmen, things got very tough on the democracy movement in China. It doesn't always work out. It would be disingenuous to say it always works out, but it plants the seeds, and those seeds may take weeks, months, years, decades, but the seeds get planted. People realize they have agency and power, and things start to move.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the civil rights march, you wouldn't think that what we saw happen to George Floyd 5 years ago be still
Right.
happening. It's happening every day.
Still happening. Yeah. Arab Spring, we all saw it, a fruit seller in Yemen. And then suddenly millions on the street, and suddenly, people recognizing that they're not alone. And these rules, these extreme theocracies, these extreme governments that operate with the barrel of a gun, they cannot face people on the streets the way you're looking at, what is that, 1 million or 2 million people in Tahrir Square there?
Mm.
That's a lot of people. You're a government and people organize that way and show up that way. It's the beginning of something, and something to be really aware of. Okay, so indie media, I had very direct experience of this one. We in Seattle and in November of '99, the WTO had a meeting in Seattle, and thousands upon thousands of folks got on the streets and confronted the WTO for their economic policies, for the debt slavery they were visiting all over the world. So many people. And what happened was, for the first time ever, this is now in November of '99, a small group of people started what is known as the Independent Media Center movement. These are people who knew how to do radio on the internet, who knew how to publish newspapers, who knew how to do what pre-blogging blogging looked like on the internet. And we're down in LA looking at this thing going, oh my God, look at this. They went from they logged on to the internet on November 29th, and on November 30th, they were getting 1 million hits a day. And this is a big damn deal. We started an Indie Media Center here in Los Angeles in anticipation of the Democratic National Convention in 2000, D2K, and we aligned with a lot of groups, and we had an independent media center at Patriotic Hall, and we had 1,500 journalists who, excuse me, registered to be part of that. We had computers and folks who knew how to, the technology and the radio. And we Amy Goodman came and lived inside of our space, and we did Democracy Now! From there. And LAPD shut us down. They shut us down, declaring a that there was potential for violence. And we somebody published the Bernard Parks' home phone number on the front page of Indie Media. And LAPD reached out to us and said, you better take that number down. And we said, you better let us go back on the air. And we had a partnership with Free Speech TV in Denver. And we had a huge footprint of people who could suddenly tune in. And we had built a TV studio by hand, grassroots, totally volunteer. And they let us, they had really kind of had to negotiate with us. And we got back on the air. And as legend would have it, Rage Against the Machine turned out and showed up at Staples Center to play for us. We made a holy noise, and the whole idea of independent media, as up until that point was reflected at Pacifica on the radio, but to take over the airwaves on television and to have a group of activists making all different kinds of media had not happened until really this point with that kind of scale. And since then, I think we've all seen what's happened with independent media in every direction. So, big moment and all nonviolent direct action.
Wonderful. And of course, I remember all of this.
It kept me in LA. That's all I can say. I was like, I came for a few months. I was like, oh, this town,
Yeah.
Occupy Wall Street. So this is when the internet really became alive with the reach all over the world of what it looked like for folks to come together and take control of their own spaces. What started in Zuccotti, a little history here. People may not know that up until that in June, before September, in June, people tried to occupy Zuccotti in New York. And there were a dozen people doing the occupation. Nobody showed up. Then they got smart about how they messaged it on the internet. And when they occupied Zuccotti in September, everybody showed up. And suddenly there were 1,000 occupations all over the world. We got to support the digital media creation of the movement, and we were getting uploads from folks that were like, as I said a couple of days ago, we had folks in Alaska in igloos sending us videos saying we are occupying this,
Oh,
and all over the world, really, like every continent. And one could argue that the Occupy movement really became Bernie's platform. It is fair to say that what populist, sort of, let's just say, progressive thought, Occupy really allowed all of that formation, which allowed Bernie, I would say, sadly today, that movement was redirected in certain ways and is now causing immense suffering all over the planet. But that's another conversation for another time. All of this nonviolent direct action. Okay, Black Lives Matter. So 2013, a group of activists gathered. I remember one of the earliest meetings in West Hollywood in a park, folks talking about, marching and doing this and that. And this movement, despite immense efforts to denigrate the intentions of the movement, became, in my humble opinion, the most important civil rights movement that came anywhere close to what happened in the 60s. And we were all put on notice that the racism that we had all put under the rug and pretended was okay and like everybody was cool, it wasn't. It isn't. George Floyd, among many others, the names are endless, getting killed by police brutality, by the again the racism all over. And I'm sure you have something to say about this, Sharon, but I can tell you that this was an education for this country. And
yes. Yeah. This for me, Daily Progressive, and for me personally, one of my missions in establishing the LA Progressive is to is to educate, but multiracial, multi-ethnic across the divide. If you look at these two pictures between the Black Lives Matter movement and the young people that were in Zuccotti Park in Manhattan, you can see that there are parallel paths for activism, and we are still racially divided. And until we are no longer racially divided, I think when that happens, there's going to be a dynamic power shift. But we have to intentionally make that happen. It doesn't happen naturally because we've been so socialized to accept segregated lives. You just drive down any major street in Los Angeles, whether it's Figueroa or Sepulveda, and you'll see it's like we're going through different countries. We live very segregated lives. We have segregated outcomes, and one of those segregated outcomes is a lack of power for progressives.
I'm so with you. Um, and also technologically. Because no, those silos that you're describing, those containers that keep racial divides active, that keep class divides active, those, we have done a lot of work online, working with potential how do we create solidarity and how do we bring all these movements together? And it's quite surprising how difficult the technology on the current internet is set up so that you don't want to give your mailing list away because that's your power. So why share it with anybody else? And suddenly you have yet another version of what you're talking about. This is all a way to keep people separated, and we have to break that. We have to
Yep,
get, yeah.
absolutely. So we can talk about that offline.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Hong Kong, the umbrella movement. I just love the imagery from this
Ah,
movement.
it's a beautiful
It's totally
photograph.
beautiful. Right? And so again, so badass. These are students who raised umbrellas against tear gas. And they chalked, they took their chalk and they're writing democracy on the pavement, and they turned city blocks in Hong Kong into acts of resistance. And the world watched a new generation draw a huge line in the sand saying what they're willing to put up with. And it has had its impact. It still does today. That again was, 2014, but the ripples of that are still active there. Yep.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we move on
So
and we move on to something that completely educated an entire generation, in my opinion, of Los Angeles activists and lots of youth activists around the country. Standing Rock became a magnet for so many to get up there and support Indigenous. For the first time, people felt called to hit the streets, to get on buses, to jump in cars, to go up and stop the pipeline and support Indigenous. Really a game changer. I think so many people came out of Standing Rock understanding the power of coalescence, the power of community, the power of indigenous understandings and indigenous knowledge. This was like, we can all talk about the power of the American Indian movement in the 60s, but this pulse from Standing Rock has developed into something so deeply profound in people's appreciation of, or at least progressive appreciation of, how indigenous knowledge is going to feed our future. It's quite in my opinion, it's a watermark. It's a watershed moment in the movement. Yeah.
I could not agree with you. The LA Progressive has been fortunate enough to be able to publish the writings of Winona LaDuke,
Hmm.
and she's a brilliant woman who has a lot to teach.
So then we move on to very personal stuff, trauma that so many of us have experienced in our lives, that so many people are operating through the lens of, that so much of our government and our corporates and our leaders, quote unquote, have lived in denial of. And suddenly women are like, it's time to talk. And I will say that the Me Too movement, as a social palliative, as a healing possibility, is still just beginning to gather steam. And while women spoke up the way they did, and continue to do so, I will tell you that the men have not spoken yet the way they need to. And the amount of men, you do the statistical research, and I certainly have. I have my own experiences around this. If 1 in 6 is the number, that means you just do the math, 4 million men on the planet. 1/6 of those men is approaching 700 million. There are 700 million men on this planet that are in silence over what happened in their lives, the violence that came their way in terms of sexual violence. And if you think about how that is corrosive across every area of our life, from politics to industry to community to family, I mean, you take it all the way down. This is, in my humble opinion, an absolutely essential next step for men
Mm,
to learn how to speak up and tell their truth and not be afraid,
yeah, not be ashamed.
not be ashamed. Sorry to get so intense about that, but I got a stake in all this. I was part of an expose on all of this. It got very personal for me, and I am very committed to seeing men speak up. And I think it's going to have a big impact in the future as we all do our respective healing. Okay, so a little girl walks out of a classroom into history. Greta, who I think we all adore and honor and admire for her courage, not only back then when she started the school strike movement in Europe, but even yesterday day before, when she got pulled off a boat on her way to delivering resources, foodstuffs to Gaza. I mean, this is an honorable human. This is someone who puts themselves on the line.
Absolutely. Look at her there. Now she's kind of all grown up.
She's all grown up, but she and they brought the climate crisis to the doorstep of power. You know, they went to all the big gatherings, all the big industrialists, and they said, shame on you. And young people, will see more of that, refused. It's their future. And we messed it up. There's no getting around it.
Yes.
We allowed this violence on Mama Pachamama, on Mother Earth, to take place. We have no excuses except to
No,
honor their desire for a future.
but we don't have any excuses, but we should pass on things like you were talking about, Me Too movement, and what has also happened to men. A lot of that serves to stifle your voice.
Yes.
The harms that are done to people oftentimes result in those people losing a sense of agency in general life.
That's right. And takes our humanity and
Yeah,
oppresses it.
yeah,
And hurt people, right?
that's
So
right.
we're
That's
we're,
right.
we're living in a problem that must be solved. And I think I see all of that through the lens of as above, so below. How we treat our planet, how we treat ourselves, completely related.
That's right.
If we've been subjugated and we've been wounded and we don't work on healing our wounds and our subjugations, we take it out on the planet. We take it out on our families, our communities, the people around us, and it just never stops. So it gets very intimate, but it's very true. Um, let's keep going. So this is to my mind anyway, this is what got me out of despair and into action again in this lifetime. I was watching, it's November of 2018, October of 2018, about 150 people shut down the city of London. Shut it down. 150 people. They went to the major arteries where the cars came in and out of the city, blockaded those arteries. 6 weeks later, the city of London, it may be sooner than that, I'd have to check my dates. The city of London declared a climate emergency. The UK
Mhm.
declared a climate emergency.
Wow.
The Irish declared a climate. I mean, this climate emergency movement, because of the work, and I would argue, and I'm sure Greta would nod her head, Extinction Rebellion, if you go to like ChatGPT and you go, what's the biggest climate movement on the planet? It'll tell you Extinction Rebellion. We, for a period of time, had really used nonviolent direct action and civil disobedience to call attention to the crisis. And the statistics on media consumption around the topic of climate, it was so tiny and so unnoticeable in 2018. By 2022, the numbers had gone from like under 2% of the mainstream media nightly news to like 20 something percent. So this is how it works. You do nonviolent direct action and you cause some good trouble, in the immortal words of
Yeah, so
some
John
good people.
Lewis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you change everything. So I will keep going with Extinction Rebellion. One more slide. You will see we saw what was happening in London, and a few months later, we decided to get busy ourselves. And this was our first action on Earth Day in 2019. But I mean, since then, we have occupied banks, we have gone into the Brazilian embassy and occupied that. We've done all kinds of direct action, civil disobedience, and good trouble in every direction. Never
Yeah.
violent, always nonviolent, but we've done some really useful things. So we actually took over the Hollywood sign a day before the Oscars, caused all kinds of good trouble. We've had some fun, and I can tell you that I have seen a lot of people go from absolute climate despair into a sense of agency, as you said earlier, a sense of power that they can be part of something. So, Extinction Rebellion Los Angeles, we were very busy with 5051 on over the weekend. We did a
That's
training
right.
which
That's
you
right.
participated in. We love our work and we don't go out there and announce ourselves. We just go out there and do the work. And
Wonderful.
we're proud of that. So, and then next up is Sunrise. And this was just a few months ago. This is the Sunrise movement occupying Phillips 66 in South LA because of the toxicity that Phillips 66 brings. And there's other groups, Youth Climate Strike LA, Simbalal and that whole crew. They're like so busy in South Central and other places bringing wisdom and knowledge in nonviolent, direct, active ways so that people understand that crisis. Which brings us to the next slide. So here we are.
Ah,
Here we are.
yes,
And this is
yes.
this is Los Angeles over the weekend. A couple of
Wow.
100,000 people, 11 million all over the country. And you and I are here today, Sharon, to talk about what's behind all of this and the history behind all of this. And all these people on the street, I would say, if I had to guess, I'd say maybe somewhere between 20 and 30% of them even know the history. They're just really upset and they see this authoritarian, fascistic pulse coming across the country and they see their neighbors and the folks they know in the shops and people they know in their neighborhoods being pulled off the street by ICE. I've never seen anything like this in my lifetime in this country ever. This is this is an emergency, a democracy emergency. So I know you got something to say about this, but
I do because actually yesterday,
mm,
um, my husband and I went to a training that was offered by two organizations working together, City Council District 1, which is led by Eunices Hernandez,
yeah, Ulysses.
and Me Gente. Oh no, Mi Gente, an organization that works for the rights of the undocumented. And the training was a 4 hour training. They are attempting, this launched yesterday, to build a network of people who are willing to work to help people who are captured, run down, kidnapped by ICE. What I learned yesterday is that ICE is not keeping track of the names of the people that they are picking up. So that, let's say you're waiting for your dad to come home from work, or you're waiting for your kid to come home from school and they don't show up. If you call ICE, they will not have a record of the name of the person.
Really? I did not
Yes.
know that.
And they did the same thing with the family separation during the first Trump administration. I was on the national board of the ACLU at the time, and the ACLU sued the Trump administration. They couldn't, there were thousands of children that were separated from their families, but the children that were like newborn babies, they had no identification. They took those babies and gave them to other people. Of course, the babies don't know their name. And then the babies don't look the same. So it's not like the parents could look at them and say, "That's my baby."
Oh
If
my
you have a
God.
newborn baby 6 months later, that newborn baby doesn't look anything like they looked.
Oh my God. I can't
I
even hear
believe,
that. I can't
yeah,
even hear that.
and I believe that there are some children that they were never able to reunite. They had to do DNA because the Trump administration didn't have a plan ever to return those children. So they didn't keep a database. They didn't have flow charts. They had nothing.
It's just heartbreaking to hear it expressed that way. And thank you for sharing that, Sharon. I'm a parent. We're all, those of us who have children, we understand there's nothing about what you just said that isn't terrifying. Um, and this is government policy. We start to wonder, don't we?
Yeah.
So immigrant rights groups and Indigenous and 5051 and Indivisible and LA Progressive and Democracy Action Network and Black Lives Matter and the unions and the families and Extinction Rebellion. 11 million people all over the country saying, uh-uh. And like we said, 200,000 here in LA, no kings, enough of this monarchy crap. The philosophy of Curtis Yarvin and these people who follow this monarchistic idea and who are like playing for keeps on the right, they should be ashamed of themselves. And up until now, they haven't been properly brought to bear. But, these corporations ruling from the shadows, they're getting away with murder. And we're watching it in real time. So this mass refusal, these marches, this is against fascism, against authoritarianism, and against the erosion of like everything we believe in, democracy, right? Organize. This is about love. We fuel this with love and love of this, of the democracy we live in, of the country, but most of all, community, right? Like you really want to get down to it. Like you went yesterday to that training. That is about community.
That's right.
That is about how we show up for each other. There's the march, the No Kings March. It's a whole new chapter, and hopefully in nonviolent civil resistance, nonviolent direct action, civil disobedience. And it's a warning to these guys in power. They felt it this weekend, there's no question. But this is not like we did this one and done. We got to grow. We got to grow. And so my parting thought, or the last thing, I just get this out of my system, I was thinking about like how I wanted to frame this, and really the arc of history does not bend on its own. We bend it together, right?
That's right. That's right. I heard that Martin Luther King, as he later reflected toward the end of his life, he was wondering if that, I mean, that although that statement was very poetic about the arc of history bending toward justice, he wondered if in fact that was true.
And his writings on love, the best writings on love ever. I mean, really, so nonviolent direct action, it is our legacy, it is our history. So we rise up together, we get brave together, we never forget together. And yeah, like that old saying, we are the ones we've been waiting for, here we are. Let's get busy.
Yeah. This moment, despair ends and tactics begin. And you're so right. This is really, where we are right now. There are a lot of people that are feeling despair. But if you take action, that is the antidote to despair. It's partly what drives me. Otherwise, I just want to keep my heads under the covers and just not get up.
I would never get out of bed if I didn't have action to engage with, right? Never.
Yeah. Well, Stephen, this is a beautiful slide deck. Thank you for sharing it with us again. And thank you for the work that you do. Can you tell people where they can find out more about XR?
Sure, you can go to xrla.org. You can look up Extinction Rebellion online to see the global movement. I'm really not here to promote Extinction Rebellion. I love Extinction Rebellion. I love being part of it. I'm part of a lot of other groups. What I would encourage people to do if they want to learn more about direct action or they're interested in becoming part of, join a group. Find a group that is active in the movement to combat fascism in our time, authoritarianism in our time. Again, there's Indivisible, there's 5051, there's the Democracy Action Network, there's Extinction Rebellion, there's groups that you can find online and you find your people. My recommendation, just to get it out of my system, is to find a group that's generally non-hierarchical. So you don't find yourself being like in the throes of some leadership who's going to tell you how to feel your activism. Find a group that is flat and allows people to bring their best and finds ways for those people to feel part of and to deliver their own, version of what, nonviolent direct action looks like. And those groups are out there. Certainly, Extinction Rebellion is one of them. We have a website again, it's xrla.org. If you're interested, get on there and send us a note saying you're interested, and we'll be back at you telling you when we're having our next meeting, stuff like that. But we come at this from a place of love and compassion and empathy and nonviolence. And I just want to say that over and over again because it is key to all of our futures. And
Absolutely.
Sharon, can I just say thank you? You
Thank
showed up
you.
so beautifully on the Know Your Rights training, and we're going to get that out the door soon. Hopefully, you'll link to it. And just a lot of gratitude for you and Dick's endless work to keep people awake and paying attention. Thank you for that.
It's funny you should talk about keeping people awake. Come here, honey. Wait, Dick is always sitting right beside me. Look at this t-shirt.
Hey,
Look at this t-shirt.
I love that shirt. Check you out. I want one of those. Thank you, Dick. Thank you.
Okay, Stephen.
Okay, be
Well,
well.
thank you for joining me, and I look forward to us doing some more work together in the future.
Thank you for sticking
So
Thank you.
long.
around. If you
Be
like the
well.
LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.